Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we are here today to discuss the 11th Cycle with the author Kian N. Ardalan and, of course, Chris Moen. And we will be getting into all the spoilers. So if you have not read the book yet, do not watch. There's too much in this book that will be spoiled for you. You want to experience it on your own. If you're one of those weird people who don't mind being spoiled, then I guess you can stay. But I recommend reading the book instead. So Kian, can you give us an introduction?
Absolutely. Name is Kian N. Ardalan. I am an author. I am the author of the fantastically underwhelming epic, and my upcoming next book, much darker, 11th Cycle. Born in Germany, my parents are Iranian. Lived in Austria the past 7 years now, and I'm just living the dream, being able to come on shows, talk about books that I wrote, and yeah. I love everything fantasy, basically, and that's pretty much it.
Nice. And of course, Chris.
Talking of living the dream,
Yeah.
I'm a sometimes booktuber, sometimes other YouTuber, and lover and reader of dark fantasy. It turns out now, because I get to speak to an author about a book that is, like, honestly, went through the whole realm of emotions from start to finish, from just pure enjoyment, of joy, of all the rest of them, to, like, I won't be not shy about saying it, the most upsetting scene I have ever read in a book in my life. And for somebody who is kind of emotionally detached, I'm very good at being emotionally attached all the time, I had to pause for a minute and go, Jesus Mary, this is really something. Which I'm sure we'll get to at some stage.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that.
So excited.
Yeah, it's funny hearing horror authors and people who write darker, like, dark fantasy, when someone says, "Oh, it just destroyed me," it's like, "Oh, right, like I got it."
Exactly. I'm grinning like a maniac. Like, yes, good.
Yeah. So at the end of part one, Aaron had a question for us. I wanted to cue it up for us, because we did end part one about world building and the epigraphs, but Aaron liked how you use the epigraphs to show and tell the show don't tell principle very effectively.
I'm very happy to hear that. I don't know if there's a question there, but I will take it as a question. I think it's not only a principle of, like, the whole show don't tell. It's obviously part of it, but I think it really harks back to the idea that I wanted to leave things as almost ambiguous as possible, because I wanted the reader to be able to infer whatever meaning they wanted to into that, and then connect it with other scenes or other moments as well. And there are quite a few of them. Obviously, I won't give that away, because that spoils the fun. But if you were to read some of those epigraphs and then read another scene from the book, you will notice, oh, like, that epigraph is actually referring to this moment. Yeah, and that's precisely what I wanted. Yeah.
And a couple of Chris had pointed out to me, a couple of the names in the epigraphs were a little familiar. I thought that was really neat that you did that. I did a double take, like, who wrote that, or who said that?
Yeah. I was in Mark Lawrence's Discord. I'm like, actually, does anyone here want to get categorized? And there were quite a few of them. Like, hell yeah! And then I think everybody forgot about it until the book came out.
I don't know whether Sean and you was surprised when I mentioned her on the stream the other week that she makes an appearance in the book. Yeah,
I think she's just really good at a poker face.
Yeah, I think so, probably too.
Yeah.
But there were a couple. It was kind of nice to kind of see. It was like almost like a reward for being in the crowd. In the in crowd. Like, if you didn't know, you'll not know. But if you know, you know.
Yeah. I never thought of it that way, but that is such a cool. Yeah, I really like that. It's like an Easter egg for a very specific group of individuals.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, that's really neat. Very cool. And I did love the way that the cycles are explained, and it does it makes the world and everything feel very rich and full, and it makes you want to learn more about it, you want to find out more, and how much of it is true and how much of it is not true.
I'm very happy to hear that. it's very interesting as well because there's some people who read early drafts of the book and it's like, oh, I think you have a continuity error here. And I'm like, I probably do. Please show me. And but then they show me, and then it's like, because like, oh, you said this at this point, but then later on in the book you say this instead. It's like, nope, that's absolutely intentional. I'm glad you caught on to that. Yeah. Yeah.
I find it really, really interesting how some of the things, maybe I picked it up wrong at the time, but things like the chapters with the seeds being born and that kind of side of the world, you kind of, maybe this is just my assumptions and using my kind of knowledge of having read a lot of fantasy novels before, that's happening in like a heaven or in another part of the world. But actually, as the go through the book, actually feeling that that's a very visible place within the world, and actually people can go to, and it's not the kind of the ascension part. It's very much, you know, a corner of the world that is kind of hallowed, or people don't go near, or you know, that kind of stuff. That it was very much part of the world rather than just kind of somewhere else or in the clouds somewhere.
Absolutely, and I did write it in a way which is like, you know, almost Mount Olympus for the Greeks. Like you can see it; it's in your line of sight. It's just the scaling up to the place, which is very, very difficult. And at the same time, when I wrote it, I wanted it to feel like this is the edge of the world, and not just that it's the edge of reality. Like this is where everything is, you know, it's losing form. And I personally hope that it relates back to the themes of creation. Like, yes, this is where creation started, but that's also why the concept of its reality is more unfettered. It's more unclear. Yeah.
And it's always looming for the, not only for the reader, but for the characters in the world. There's always a reminder. It's always there. I think that made it seem kind of more real or closer to everyone, because you can't forget because it's always there.
Yeah.
And how that works for different people. Obviously, for the people that revere the elders, it's a reminder of, you know, their place within the world and that there's somebody greater than them. But also from the other side, where you look at it and go, that's a reminder of the oppression. That's a reminder of actually all that's wrong in the world, and kind of the natural order of things don't have to be that way because of that, and how they try and take that apart.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad that comes across because it's always different for everyone, and there's distinct characters in the story that very, you know, they comment on those differences a lot. Yeah.
And I did like the different those differences that not everyone agreed, and everyone had different opinions on it, different takes.
Yeah.
And No, go ahead. Sorry.
Nothing. I was just going to say I really hope that that's the case, and not just that, but like, you know, there is, because we're into the spoiler stuff, so I can bring up spoiler stuff, right?
Yep.
There are like scenes, you know, like talk about the contract of time and how there are specific characters who distinctly say the contract of time is a tool for the oppression of mortals. It's so that they are bound and reliant on the cycle, so that they encourage the cycle, kind of thing. So there is a lot of that,
almost like a treadmill.
Yeah.
And Aaron had a question for Chris. Did you cry though, Chris?
There's only one thing ever makes me cry. Well, sorry, it's two. But one mainly is bromance. I don't know what the hell it is. So this was not a bromance section. I winced very badly. It was actually, I read it during one of the sprints that Steve did during the week, and I kind of went, holy Jesus, that's one of these things that I don't want to talk about right now, but I also do want to talk about it right now. That kind of thing. I winced very badly, and I don't wince at anything. It was really, you know, something that really caught me, you know, because I think probably the intention was to, when you think somebody can't sing lower, that they can actually. There are other places to go.
I guess you're referring to the whole Nora.
So the rape mutilation scene.
Yeah. I guess this is something that we need to cover anyway.
Yeah.
So going back to disability being a very important topic in this, I told several of the people that I was, and a little bit bashfully, I told them like, this is what I want to do. I want to have somebody who's already disabled, kind of recovering, going, making the best out of the situation. And then I want their other limbs to be chopped off, and I want them to also be sexually assaulted.
Jesus.
And I'm saying this to disabled people, right? So it was not easy for me. And they were totally, because the thing is, a lot of them do comment on the fact that they don't like being talked down to as if they are to be pitied. And that's something I definitely transferred over to Nora, where there's a lot of like, she feels like things that she specifically says, things that are mundane for the everyday person are suddenly being seen as things that she shouldn't even be able to succeed in, and yet she does, and everybody applauds, and it makes her feel like she doesn't deserve that. It feels like any sort of small victory that she has feels dirty because of it. And in terms of the rape scene, I told one of the individuals like, hey, this is what I want to do. And he said, look, you're already going to have her mutilated on top of that. I don't. And I remember giving him like, here's what I have so far for Nora. And he comes back to me and he's like, hey, you know what? She's badass. You can go ahead with like the sexual abuse stuff. And I think it's so part of the reason why I did that was you have a character who is so confident and strong, right? And then there's this kind of idea that these kinds of characters in fiction cannot be stopped. They're unstoppable. And I wanted to kind of pose that question of like, what happens if a person who really has a kind of unyielding, unstoppable spirit suddenly is forced to face their own limitations? And I think that's what it is. For a lot of people, they read that and they think, oh no, she's now completely lost all her limbs. For me, writing that though, it was about her and her realization of like, I can't do anything to stop this. And it was about her kind of realization of like, no matter how strong my spirit is, there are things in the world that I can't, do anything about. And it was a lot about like death of identity, because she had linked her own identity to being like somebody who escaped from her abusive parents, somebody who was able to make a life for herself and have her own company and be a very proficient soldier. And suddenly that part of her was dead. Yeah. And I did try to write a lot of that, showing her grief as she, was bargaining. She was went through rage, and she went through, at the end, she was starting to go into acceptance. And then all of that, again, was dashed away from her. And it was a lot of that. And part of it as well, and this is such an important topic to me, evidently, because I can't stop talking. But her character, it happens a lot with disabled individuals that they are helpless to being rape victims. And I think that's part of the story that I wanted to say. If I'm doing a character who is going through disability, and I want to show all the horrors of it, of like how religion might treat her as an object of like, this is her penance, or if I want to show like how society might pity her or treat her. And then at the same time, it's like the rape part is unfortunately a big part of that. And then at the very end, this is something that I don't know if many people will catch on to, but I'm very happy I did this, is that rape in grimdark fantasy is unfortunately very common, because it's usually a subject to motivate or grow the male character. And I feel like it does the woman character a little bit dirty, that the only reason she's being raped is for the man. And yet in this book, Arafiel comes up to her and says, who did this? And she refused to tell him, because it was her injustice to write. And I'm very happy that I did that. Yeah.
I have to be honest, I read it and was like unsure whether I supported the fact that it was in there. I mean, it does naturally create, as you're going through the book, then what I would call the Seven Samurai aspect of the book, where you get to the point where you're trying to assuage whether somebody's hope or whether somebody's fear or anything like that, and you're trying to see, right, who are the individuals in the story and which box do they tick. And actually very skillfully, I would say, in your part, you kind of, and actually through Delilah's own thing, most people are multiple things, and they can tick multiple boxes, etc. as well. But at the time, you're like, oh, well, she must be that one because that's one that was mostly prevalent, and doing that. And then you think, God, does that create the reason for that happening? And as you've just explained, it's so multi-layered, actually, what goes on with that. My main question actually from it was like, if you had partners or loved ones reading it and they read it and they didn't know about it, did they check to see you were okay afterwards, or?
I love that. I know confidently that my parents are not going to read it. They're very supportive. They're always elated when it's like, oh my god, another 5-star review. But I know for a fact they're not going to read it. I think I'm going to be a little bit more embarrassed about the smut rather than about the rapes. But I don't know. I feel like, as far as the rape scene is concerned, as much as possible, I did not embellish it. I did not try to, in any way, I don't know if glorify is the right word, but I did not. I tried to treat it with as much respect as I could, as being a very serious topic, without pulling punches, because I wanted to show that this is a very real issue and very raw. As far as things go, my girlfriend read it, and I remember she was. Sorry, it's not the fact that it's funny. It's just that my girlfriend's reaction was very funny. She's very hooked up on things that are realistic, quote unquote, and not realistic. And she read that scene and she's like, she's being mutilated? No, that's too unrealistic. You can't do it. And I think at the time, it's just the fact that she could not really accept that sort of reality, that something so terrible could happen to a person. But as far as things go, that was the worst reaction I got, which is, wasn't so bad. Other times I had people reach out to me and it's like, at that part I had to put the book down because I couldn't continue. And I totally get that as well. Yeah.
I have to say, that was exactly the same reaction as mine at the time. I actually went over and reread the part which was being mutilated because I thought there's just no way. There's just no way when this is happening to her that also this is also happening at the same stage. It's like depravity of, I don't know, it was tough.
Yeah, I think it's a double whammy. And, listening to it in the audiobook, I also I do get uncomfortable. And I'm like, wow, the performance is great, but I just, in my core, I'm like, I don't feel good listening to this.
Aaron had a comment. There is so much to explore in how partners of victims, if that's the right word, deal with what's happened to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to clarify as well, is that partners of victim, quote unquote, being Nora in this case? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for her, it's more like the relationship in general that she always had with her parents. Because I don't know if, I guess there is Arafiel and how Arafiel was feeling, protective of her and, had the best of intentions. But Nora's like, no, this is my wrong to right. And I would say that her state of mind is a little bit compromised at the moment, when she seeks out vengeance and sets out and everything. And, seeks out her own retribution. Yeah.
And how much does it worry you, or how much does it play into your decision-making process when you're writing it? Do you think, actually, a lot of people will probably get to this point and put the book down permanently at this stage?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I hear it a lot. I hear a lot of people, writing hey, this is great, but if you can't stomach the stuff, don't read it. And which is great, because I know there are going to be some people who take that and heed that warning and I'm not going to try. But I think anyone who ends up becoming curious enough to give it a shot, I haven't had one person who was like, no. And I don't know. I hope it's because I treated the subject with respect, and I hope that I tried to prepare the reader for this, because she also if she went through that, the mutilation rate and had all of her limbs chopped out at that moment, I feel like that would have been too gratuitous and too much. But because I already showed how she was dealing with her disability earlier on, that it made it more stomachable. But at the end of the day, I will say this. There were scenes that I changed because of the fact that it felt because I felt like I could change it. I wouldn't go against the spirit of the book. But I felt in this case, yes, it's tough, but I felt like it went in the direction of like, I want to show real suffering. I want to show how even through the darkest of times that there is a way to come forward and go through it in a way that, doesn't downplay it. It really shows it at its full force, but it's respectful in how it does it. Yeah. And I hope I succeeded. At the end of the day, I might have gotten it wrong, but I did absolutely do my best. Yeah.
And I never expected the cover, because seeing the three arms and everything, I didn't. That was a surprise. Who the person on the cover is? I thought that was neat because I wasn't expecting that.
You mean that it's like an elder card?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think part of the reason why I settled for that is because it's in the name. It's literally the guard standing watch over this world. So you have to flip the page open, go past that guard to delve into that world. And I felt like it's a little, nod towards the fact that, you are going through a warning to delve into things that some not be able to handle. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Once I kind of caught on to what that was, it was like, well, that's pretty neat. It's a great idea. Yeah, it's a pretty cool idea. And how bad or how was it writing the smuttier scenes? That the first one in the camp was. I was thinking we're on Sprinson.
We were, yeah.
Whoa.
Full of regret. That's what I'm gonna say. So it was. I'll put it like this. I was portraying a raw world, and I didn't want to shy away from themes like sex either. What I do now think, looking back, is like, okay, I think for the most part everything is okay. It's bordering on like very pornographic. I think the only one that I'm like, why did I do that is Nora and Rafik. But at the end of the day, I wanted to show something intimate. I wanted to show something raw because I felt it spoke to the world at large. With the early, orgy scene with Kruma and co. At the end of the day, I did not put it there for the sake of it. At least that wasn't my intention. It was really about showing Chroma's insecurities and the fact that he had a lot of doubt going on. And there is that sense of like when you're a young youth of like, people saying, oh, did you, have sex? And, your worth is kind of graded by that. And it does come with a lot of insecurities surrounding that too. And I wanted that to be a focal point of Chroma's journey. One thing that I did do early on with Kruma was the fact that his character would, how do I put this? So because of the fact that it turns out that Jasper is his actual dad, spoiler.
Love that,
yeah. It's like 16 years that he was in that camp. Early on, within the first draft of the book, Kruma was quote unquote 10, but I put it in like a carve physiology so that they mature a lot quicker. So by the time that sex scene happens, he's already like 16 in theory, right? Still, I had some beta readers, particularly as well. Mark Lawrence is like, you might upset some individuals with this because they might not see past the fact that like, okay, physiology, because it still feels weird for them. So at the end of the day, I bit the bullet. I'm like, you know what? They are actually like, 16. They still mature a little bit quicker. But I feel like that was the only change I made because I feel like it didn't go against the spirit of what that was about, which is Chroma's insecurities regarding himself. And there's a lot of identity crisis with him. Yeah.
I particularly found it fascinating because I've just literally read another book where the exact same themes are explored. This idea that young men should be the best versions themselves at that age, Kian. You know, where society does tie an awful lot, or expectation ties a lot of their worth in their sexuality, you know, and actually how important that is to young man, and that sometimes people aren't willing to discuss that, but that is who 16, 17, 18-year-old men are, and that they sort of have to apologize for it even later in life because it's part of their growth process or otherwise. And so actually I quite liked the fact that that was very much who he was, and actually how he dealt and changed with that as time went on through his life. I think it's a very realistic exploration of young male adolescence, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm very like that. That's the best thing I can hear, because at the end of the day, I want it to be realistic and respectful too. And I think that's some of the best praise I do get, and I'm very proud of getting. It's like a lot of people say that if nothing else, the characters are very believable in terms of like the struggles that they go through. Yeah.
And when he in the beginning, when he's approached and he walks away, he's afraid. I think that's relatable for a lot of people, because when you're that age and when you're young, you're not sure what to do, and you know you want to, but you don't know where to begin. So I thought that kind of made him relatable in that way. Like it wasn't just it made the characters all feel like they're people, and they don't always know what to do, or they don't always have the best, or what you would expect to happen. What you would expect is he would accept the invitation, and but he didn't, and I thought that put a spin on it that I wasn't necessarily expecting.
I'm glad, very much so. Yeah.
The more interesting ones for me was because I had it in my head. You're a male author writing about the female masturbation scenes. I thought that's really, like, one, brave, and two, like, why would you even do that?
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons why I became confident to go ahead, like, I talked to somebody, Frank, a really, really nice guy. He has a German podcast, and he, talked about my debut. He's also going to talk about 11th Cycle. And he said, "Hey, I love the book. I love the, world building. It's beautiful, 5 out of 5. But you also have made me realize that I do not like it when men write women in sex scenes." And I totally get that, And I think, however, I did have a woman who read it, and she said, first of all, she said she really appreciates the fact that I put in the idea of self-harm without like making it about a sort of, evil ritual, right? It's really about, a character suffering, and that I inserted the idea of woman masturbation without having any kind of concepts of guilt or shame tied to that. And, it's labeled it as positive force. For Nora, it was a very, very easy choice to have her, because a lot of people assume that if you are disabled, that you're suddenly asexual, and that's not the case. So I think that was important to show that, hey, this is a woman who is disabled, but she can still be a sex object, and she can still be an object of desire, and that's not a bad thing. I think there is something to be said about like a kind of like a sexuality revolving around disabled communities as well. On the other hand, you have Delilah, and I think for her, it was an exploration of somebody who is also just really, really disgusted with themselves and full of, self-hatred. And yet there's this moment that she is forced to face a lot of her own lies, and that she tells herself, and that there's still a possibility that she can find a way to, love herself and have a sexual, side of herself. And I know there are going to be a lot of people who come to me and it's like, hey, rape scene, woman masturbation, the sex scenes in general. And at the end of the day, I feel pretty confident that I did what I did for good reasons, and it might not stick the landing with everyone, and that's okay. Yeah.
I don't know if this was everybody, but certainly with the Delilah scene, I think for me there was a sense of, thank God, this girl has something other, or another way to express her feelings about herself, either positive or negative, other than cutting herself. And I almost felt guilty for that, for having that feeling for her, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And saying, "Oh, this is better. This is better than the other thing," even though it was very clear as went through the book that she was still doing it. You know, just being part of a matter of fact for her. When she did stresses in her life that she would do those things. You know.
Yeah, and it's very hard for a lot of people. And I don't know. I think very early on with Delilah, I was fascinated by this idea of because there was I had this idea with D&D of a character who is like a woman, priestly, and she has a warm smile and she helps everyone, but her motivations are corrupted, and she's doing it because she's trying to fill a hole inside herself. And with Delilah, it's rough, like suicidal ideation and a lot of that, and a lot of self-hatred. And it is like absolutely this kind of like her entire quest is about her having to find a way to understand that like her motivations are corrupted, and the fact that she needs to stop hating herself so much. Yeah.
And Aaron had a couple of comments when I get to it. Thought that was a really fitting use of smut scenes. They weren't just gratuitous; they had purpose.
I'm glad you think so. I'm not completely agreeing as far as Rafiq and Nora are concerned. I feel like I could have dialed that down a little bit, but I do feel like I'm glad that comes across at least with Kruma. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, yes, it was refreshing to read different experiences for both men and women. You also explored gender somewhat. It seemed though Nora being a warrior and how she challenges expectations.
Absolutely. I'm really glad it comes through that way. And I think, I do explore gender not through just Nora, but like through the non-binary elders, because there are a lot of elders who are non-binary. And you have the 11th Seed who is non-binary. So there is that kind of exploration there.
Also, most of those scenes were really interesting to me because they were used for introspection for the characters, sometimes obvious insecurities of the moment, sometimes much deeper.
I'm glad. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I focus a lot of that, of like the kind of inner turmoil that they're going on. And I feel like I had somebody who asked me, like, what's my thought process when it comes to writing characters and making them believable and kind of their inner raw emotions. And I told them, I think it has a lot to do with my youth and my the fact that I had untreated anxiety as a kid. So being high functioning, I started to just look at people and try to understand their behavior. And I think that has helped me really understand the kind of narrative that goes on in some people, and that is working out now when writing, because I feel like if somebody is suffering, I empathetically really understand what the reasoning behind that could be. Yeah.
And we mentioned a little bit a minute ago, but Kruma and the revelation of who his dad was and the reasons around, I thought that was, that was, wow.
It was so well done though, because you actually had the exploration of it, beforehand when he finds out about his mother and Jasper already, and what he thinks is after the fact. That she is just being, for want of a better word, a whore for him because of recent, things that have happened. Supporting him and not having money, etc. But actually, that it goes back much further, and you go, oh man, when it hits you, it hits you.
Are you threatening me? Or
Well, I'm saying basically at the time when Kruma decides to snap his neck, your emotional state as the reader does exactly the same thing. And it's like, no.
And I think I with him, identity is such a big part, especially you're talking about somebody who's still, that age of like 16 to 25 is such an important time in your life. Even now you have those who are like in that kind of age and they're discovering, sorry for mentioning him, but I feel it's very relevant, like Andrew Tate, and learning of a figure that's like, trying to help you soul search. And he is in a very, very vulnerable age. And he has links to the fact that he is from a warrior tribe, yet he's not allowed to be a warrior because he's a refugee. and and at the same time he is linked to like this great figure, Muktaou, and everybody's like, oh, that's your dad, that's fantastic. And then all of a sudden he learns all of that is a lie. His dad is a nobody, and I feel like there's a lot that goes on there all at once for him, and that's tough for him to swallow.
Something really struck me actually about reading it, not even before that, but just about the use of racial diversity, as being, because at the start of it, the car is sort of set up as the bad guys, if you know what I mean, and in true bad guy style, it's more than that, obviously, and it's getting through, but actually that they are a more like dark race, and that he also is then mixed as it becomes the mixed heritage, mixed culture, and actually how, if that's something that you wanted to explore from the outset, maybe that was one of the things that you really wanted to put in the book as an exploration, alongside the disability and the self-harm and all of the other things that you decided to do as well.
I really did not hold back in retrospect. And it paid off. I'm glad I didn't, have anyone to tell me it's like, oh, this might be a little bit too much. And I feel like as long as I really showed the respect, which I did, and then I don't think it's an impeccable book that's really done its homework in a lot of ways. I think so. One thing which after the fact I was like, I'm not sure, but I'm like, you know what? I think it's all right. Is the idea that I am doing non-binary higher beings, right? Because there is this argument that you're othering the trans community. You're suggesting that they are inhuman. At the end of the day, that was never my intention, and I feel like I wrote a story that is exploring the idea of non-binary being a possibility, which is just natural in the world, and it doesn't have to have negative connotations of like an other. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think just like anything else is representation, though, isn't it? That there are all different types of people within the book, etc. Like I have a child who's transgender, right? So actually, when I read that, I went, well, that's interesting that that's also in this book. That there's those things even being explored, and I never really looked at it in terms of the higher being, or the people that are kind of the most powerful being non-binary being interested. I just kind of went, okay, it's interesting that is not seen as important even at that kind of level. If you know what I mean, the sexuality or identity, or gender, something that's really important to a higher level being.
And I'm very glad to hear that. Yeah. And I think like I'd love to talk about it, but we're gonna have more discussions like this as the books come out. But I think there's going to become it's going to become a lot more apparent, like the motivations of the elders as well, and the world structure as it is. Because I absolutely, when I wrote it, I did not want to in any way imply that people really care about gender in this world, because it's not necessarily important to them. The same way you had indigenous, American tribes which had several concepts of transgender identity. Yeah. And I think that people forget that like there were communities or cultures that they have no qualms with that, and that's very much a real possibility. Yeah.
I wonder too if you were exploring time, the concept of time in this one, because it did start to wonder about time, like what is, because not just in the book but just in life, like what is time? Is it a force? Does it not exist? And it kind of made me wonder while I wasn't reading the book about time and what time is, because I felt like you played with that a little bit, or was that just me looking for things?
I think you really struck onto something, and it's a bigger part of the theme of the overarching series and not just the book in question. So I'm not going to give away too much, but I think it's like one of my favorite epigraphs was something along the lines of people had the misconstrued understanding that death reaps a soul from a body with scythe in hand. That is wrong. Death does not wield a scythe; it wields time. And I think the bigger concept of time within the overarching novel is this idea that the world is dying away. In a sense, it is quote unquote rotting. And I feel like it's that kind of end of time, 11th cycle, the 11th hour of the clock kind of thing. it is that end of things kind of relevance, as far as I was, trying to suggest in the book, that time is important here. As for the contract of time, I very much did implement that as a way to relate to the concept of some way to bind people to that. If they want to live longer, if they want more months in a year, then they need to need to support the elders and the seed and everything. Yeah.
It's almost used as a tool, as a weapon.
Yeah, it is, and I feel like that's something that happens a lot in terms of like systems of oppression, which is like, I will give you this thing if you give me this, and you suggest that it's mercy. You suggest that it's your act is being benevolent. It was interesting. I feel like, so there are some themes in the book where people are like, wait, that's a thing? I remember Arlena, she read the book, and she was really surprised when I told her, like, the forgotten is actually a real thing in this world. Or like Mark Lawrence was reading it, and he's like, wait, so that's not just them being crazy? Like, the month does actually get added, like the cosmic calendar does grow because of that. And I feel like it feels like something new enough within a world building that people are like, oh, that's interesting, because usually there's like the set start of a day and end of the year. And I think that it's new enough that people are just a little bit surprised. For me personally, I was hard getting out of that mindset of like, okay, the world here is not necessarily round. It's not necessarily within a vast cosmos of different planets. Of like, how can I make it a contained universe of its own being? Yeah.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. I love that aspect of the story. That was really, really interesting. And then you mentioned the 11th cycle, and kind of like a clock, and it almost felt like a doomsday clock, like time is running out, like we're close to the end, like we have to, something has to happen. It kind of gives you that sense of urgency, like something's about to happen or something has to happen.
Yeah. And Forgotten Seed is definitely going to explore that more. It's going to be about the doomsday clock is coming to an end, and the book one ends with the Elder King going, okay, like now you're ready, you can slay the evil. It still leaves a big overhanging question mark. Okay, like what is this evil thing? We still don't know. And book two is going to explore that and explore the idea of just this entropy that's happening with the world in question.
Yeah, the end of the book, because I was wondering, because I don't know if we've talked about it before, but I was wondering how long the series would be, and as we were going, because I thought it might be a standalone, but as we were going through, and there was so much being set up, and not in a good way. There was a lot that was set up, and a lot we're building, and at the end, okay, this is a big story. Like this is we're just getting started.
At minimum, I know for a fact it's going to be at least 4 books. It might stretch out to be 5 in total, depending on certain events that I will see how I feel when I get closer to that. If I feel like those elements are necessary, I will explore them. Otherwise, it will be 4 books.
4 big books.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think this book would have been longer even. I had plans to, so when Delilah and Nora go to Mount Moriar, I had plans to have Delilah meet some of the other elders there. But I'm like, I'm already really, it's already a massive book. So I cut that out. But I think it's just a symptom of the fact that you have 5 POVs, right? And that by itself is a lot. And that just naturally ends up being like, if you want to give all characters the same amount of attention, you end up with a naturally big book. And I think that's something that made it rather easy to have enough content there, and not trivial content either. Yeah.
Yeah, I was more intimidated by the size of it than I was when I started reading it, if that makes sense. As soon as you start reading it, you kind of realize this flows really really quite quickly, which again surprised me because I think a lot of your prose is very descriptive. You know, there's a lot of very descriptive part in there, and I kind of thought, oh, this is going to be heavy, but it wasn't. It just flowed very, very nicely and easily. And
I'm
actually
very
raced through
happy here.
the second half of the book. I think I just said to somebody, it just disappeared, like it just was gone.
I flew through it. I mean, I was surprised how fast I was going through it, just because it has a nice flow to it. It just didn't feel like a quick book.
I feel like coming to these discussions and having these talks, it alleviates a lot of the fears of like, oh, was the pacing good enough? Was the story good enough? So it's very like, I'm glad that it just flowed and that the second half was a breeze. Yeah.
Because I think, I know, Chris, you felt this way. Like, you're reading, even, they don't even have to be big, thick books, but sometimes you're reading, it's like, oh, what are we doing? What's going on? Like, I have 200 more pages to go. Like, what's going on? But with this one, I didn't even, it just kept going. Yeah, it didn't feel like that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think really helps it, that happens in a lot of POV books, is like it feels like you have to have, say you do Kruma's chapter, we're not going to get Kruma's next chapter for another 4 chapters or another 5 chapters. You have to do everybody one at a turn, whereas you were able to build up a run of chapters in somebody's story because it was a key part of the story, and it kind of propelled you on through to say, give me more of that, and then you're like, oh god, I really feel it. I need a break from this character, and then somebody else come along and do
Yeah.
It.
It's interesting because when I wrote this, I remember Nora's first incident with Witchade. She gets into the accident, and the immediate next chapter shows like she's disabled now. The second time it happens with the mutilation scene, I really tortured readers because I did not show what happens to her right after.
Yeah.
Right? I know that there were some readers who could not, wait, so they just flipped ahead just to see what happened to her.
Wow. And now that we're talking about this, I think because of the themes in it, I think because they're like, the chapter lengths and the switch in POVs really helped with the heavier themes, because you had a break. You would have you would focus on other characters. It wasn't a constant, the deeper, it wasn't, I mean, they all had deep themes, but you had, breaks between.
Yeah, I'm very glad. John Morrow did an interview, and one of the questions he also asked was I don't remember the question, but I remember my answer being that one of my goals with this was controlled suffering, in the sense that I didn't want to be like, how can I milk the most amount of suffering out of my readers, but it's like I want to give as much suffering as I feel like a reader should be able to tolerate before I continue with the next part. And sprinkled in are lighthearted moments. I know that Arlena again was reading it, the audiobook, and she said that she was laughing so much when she was like, Nora just turned disabled, and yet Delilah is worried that somebody might have caught her masturbating, and she loved that contrast, especially when it's like Mother Lucia like slapped her around the head for being so childish, and that it's not important. So I think those moments are there when they need to be. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Sorry. I thought it was interesting at one point of the book. I can't remember exactly what it was. I actually stopped and went, I actually don't think I like any of these characters at this point in time. They're all filled with vengeance, or they're filled with such hateful thoughts because of what's happened to them. Like, they're not out of anywhere. And that kind of like, this is one of these situations where I'm reading a story, I'm really enjoying the story, but am I really rooting for any of them to succeed in what their current goal is, And I thought that was really interesting.
I'm very glad to hear that. And I mean, it's good that like you still want to see what happens next. I think one of my favorite scenes that I just had such a like laugh writing was all about when Nora and Kruma are laughing because the last thing she remembers is Kruma beating somebody to death with her leg.
Yeah.
And then the fact that she slipped off of his back and bumped her head against the ground, and she thought,
what a way to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I do know, I think every single character has so much that they're dealing with, you know. And then you have Arafiel, obviously, who everybody seems like this is the guy who's keeping the group together, and then suddenly meets an untimely end towards the end of the book. And I feel like that also. I know there were a few readers who were mad at me for that. Yeah.
Yeah, the one good, relatable person, although it's sort of pathetic in his own way, is wiped from the story, or the thought is wiped from the universe, and the fact that, again, the loss from his father's point of view, who then appears and could have sorted it all out freaking a couple of hours ago, there have been no losses. You know, it just felt so unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
And speaking of characters, Chris, I'm wondering, and whoever's watching this live, but Chris, what was if you had to pick a favorite character, who would it be?
Favorite character,
most intriguing. I know it's hard to support.
Yeah, I think Kruma. I think Kruma's constantly got something happening in his life. Like the pieces are always moving around Kruma rather than kind of to Kruma, if that makes sense. It's like, and it's not even the fact that everybody else knows it around him. It's just things are happening to him constantly all the time. From the fact, you know, he killed one of his own kind at the start while dealing with his own problems, then becoming a hero because of it in his village or his settlement, to then becoming sort of this figure for Raphael to kind of say, you're responsible for actually pulling all of this together and saving the world in some sort of way. To then finding out who his father is, then becoming the person that goes and accompanies Nora to, you know, search for the meaning, and then finding out who his brother, his half brother is, and stuff, and kind of question about his own heritage and his legacy. Like, I just think his whole arc is always constantly moving around him and always constantly changing, and probably will continue to do so as he fights himself. And at the part of it, still sort of be a good person at the heart of it. You know, I think that's always really interesting to read.
Make a compelling case for Kruma, I have to say.
Yeah, who's yours then, Steve?
I think throughout the book, I think my favorite was Delilah. Yeah, just her being taken away, and how she, you know, they come for her and they take her. You know, she's already in a bad situation, but she just, you know, just her, and you know, her going and being tutored, and her whole storyline. I thought I was immediately attached to her. I think the most.
She's number 2 for me, for sure. Yeah.
Especially
because I think she is the kind of person that would have lived at home all of her life, kind of thing. You know, she would have been that person, but for events that happened, and the fact that she couldn't do. And I think, you know, it probably naturally leads on to the fact that actually the exploration of her magic is seen as the witch or the evil is one of the more fascinating things that I think is to be explored throughout the whole series for me, insofar as actually why is healing seen as a witch burn them at the stake kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just to say, just imagine having the ability to heal and you can't. I mean, you're not allowed to. You're told you can't use it. That's, I mean, what would be worse than that? To know you can help people with, you know, you have the ability to help anyone and you can't.
And Mother Lucia definitely became a voice to her in that way of like just to have that healthy amount of questioning. I have a question for you guys. I'm wondering if anyone here has any juicy theories. I'm not going to be able to confirm or deny anything, but I was just very curious. In particular as well, I'm wondering if anyone has any theories about what the lights were at the bottom of Delilah's well.
Oh, yeah.
But if you don't, it's fine. I'm just curious. I love hearing the kind of theories that people can come up with.
I'm usually very pliable with this kind of thing, and kind of like what I've learned a lot throughout this year is the things that I thought were possible within the world. With the time when I was reading a book, I don't know enough about the world to even kind of begin to think about what the possibilities could be. I do think there is a thing in, like, Delilah will not be on her own. There's obviously this coven of witches that have been talked about that have been alluded to say that they're there, but I actually think that's only the very touch of the kind of rising of people that have this power, and actually how much that links to things like being inspired or the horror or any of that kind of stuff. But I think there's going to be like for me, a meeting of minds where Delilah finds that she isn't on her own, in so far as what she sees as her gift, and how special that she is. That maybe there's a connection across time or across races, etc., that kind of make more explanation of this. There you go. That's mine.
I have no idea. What I've learned through reading things like Erickson and Baker is I'm just along for the ride. And I've stopped trying to predict things because I'm always way off. So especially in fantasy now, I just hold on tight. So yeah, but if something pops up, I'll DM you about it. But Aaron had a comment. Delilah, for me though, I am thinking about the master. But that may just be arachnophobia. Yeah,
that's really. I'm always. The master was a very curious character, and there are some people who came to me with really interesting remarks about the master that I can't go into. But what I will say, throughout the book, there are a lot of clues there about the overarching world and characters. So that's some extra story if anyone's ever, like whoever's listening, right? If you want to go back and listen to the audiobook, there's a lot there, in the epigraphs, but also in the chapters themselves. Yeah.
Also, Aaron had a question. I have to ask, how do you say Levirus? I must have pronounced it 4 or 5 different ways in my head when I read.
None of them are wrong. I remember when I wrote it, my internal pronunciation was Ivarus, but that was just for me.
Let's see, my brain does IE as a Y, so it's a Yeverus for me. There you go.
I think that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Kian, did you have a favorite character? Or do you have one?
Yes. I think it's very interesting. If you were to ask me who my favorite character is among the protagonists, I would absolutely say, I think Nora. I think she is very out there as a character, which I don't feel has been done in fantasy before because it's just dealt with a lot. Like you do have angsty, you do have, conflicted, but I think it's just the whole pot with a whole lot of spice in there, which makes her more of an acquired taste. And I really had a lot of fun, like doing the research for her and really putting a lot of attention for her character. And I think that's great. I will say, if it's not specific to a main character, it might also almost be Ida from the Band of Demon Hunters. And I think she's just also a very interesting, mysterious character to explore. Yeah.
Interesting. I have to say, my favorite scene actually in the book, I think, is the bar fight with Nora, where she takes on the giant. I think there's I really enjoy that scene, and especially that, and then the resolution of it, where he pretty much takes care of her, even though he bested her in the ring. I thought that was pretty great.
I'm very happy to hear that. Yeah. That's definitely one of the scenes where it's like people got to that. It's like, oh, she's badass. And
yeah.
Kind
of puts everything else in context that happens to her, I think, in some way. Think, but for circumstances happening to her, she was formidable.
Yeah.
And could be again for sure.
Yeah.
And the scenes of her crawling around and refusing to those are some powerful scenes.
Yeah. And
just refusing to just trying to do it on her own and just refusing to give up. After everything that's happened to her.
Absolutely. And I think that's at the core of not just Nora, but as people in general who suddenly become disabled. It's one thing if you have time to process it, but if it happens all of a sudden that you have amputated limbs, it comes as a shock. That explains why she was, in shock when she found out. And then suddenly there's that anger, there is that lot of stuff. And I think that there is that sense of a loss of identity that I spoke about earlier with her specifically. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting the Seed himself, his kind of like observation role that kind of
Yeah.
came on when he was kind of in the background when following Delilah about and telling about, and especially when she was going to meet the brothers, for instance, and they were having very open and frank conversations. The kind of things that earlier in the book were very hush hush or very, I can't really say this in front of people. And the fact that he was stand noticing, and then kind of what happens at the very, very end then with all of
Yeah.
that, where he gets the option. I thought there was a really nice inflection point there where I could see Everest kind of going, I think we'll just go down this path. This seems more interesting,
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm really so. I am very happy with the fact that I gave Ivaris a third person, almost omniscient role or like POV, because you're talking about a character who's not whole yet. So I feel like doing first person would have been a little bit odd. So and doing third person then speaks to that idea of like a whole lot of distance, so much so that you don't really have a context for everything. And I really, really listening to the audiobook is also great. I love the scenes where Ivaris is like, okay, how do humans act? Oh, they smile at each other. And you just have this character who like does this really ugly grimace, and everyone's like, Delilah chiding her. It's like, stop that. And one of my favorite scenes in regards to that is how Nora, is there sitting without any limbs, and Ivaris doesn't quite understand, human or social norms, and tries to shake Nora's, arm or the stump that remains. And there's this kind of connotation of like, oh, you shouldn't do that because there's nothing there, and you bring attention to the thing you shouldn't bring attention to. But that Nora really appreciated that because it felt like such a human thing to do without making a big deal out of it. And at the very end, I feel like this is, I don't know if other people feel this way, but whenever I think about it, it's like, that's really rough. You have Delilah, a character who is, almost a paragon of good, of like being a good person. And that's her entire thing for a majority of the book. Suddenly tells Ivaris to go and kill someone, and not to mention that Ivaris mentally is almost a child in the body of, almost a god or a demigod. And there is that kind of connotation that she manipulated him into committing such a transgression with a lot of hate for somebody who is supposed to be a symbol of like healing and good. And that's something I definitely want to explore more in book 2. Yeah.
They all have their moments of very serious vengeance. I mean, Nora, obviously, when she's taken down that Eric, and obviously Cassidy, hopefully his day will come. But I mean, to me, it was always Eric that had a hand in that. He was the person that was really wronged very directly through it. But his acceptance of it was almost kind of, it was gratifying to read. It was almost like he accepted his part in the role and realized that, he had a price to pay for it, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that comes across that way. I had some people who are like, oh, Regan and Danny, it's like, oh, you should have really drawn out and shown their comeuppance. Yeah,
but they're inconsequential though. At the same time, they were only like pawns, and they were very much the fodder in the Dark Souls games of the guys that you run through each level and just kind of take out, and then get to the boss at the end.
Yeah, I think it's specifically Cassidy that people are like just waiting for like the sequels to be like, I want to see this guy get his just due. Yeah.
Especially when you set him up as such a weasel in the battle, beforehand, he really has no spine at all. It's very, very clear. He trying to flee a scene even that was causing of his own doing, a lot of the hard work of the game. So I think, not just having as a blank slate from the very first scene that we see him in, but actually having it further in line. So actually really there's nothing to him at all. It's just a person of privilege.
Yeah. And I hope that I set it up enough that like the whole thing was a surprise. Like people, Nora believes it was the demon hunters that messed up, and then there's a reveal. Actually, no, it was Cassidy.
I know we've talked a lot about like dark themes and sensitive topics for some people. But I thought having Nora, the way that she reacted to what happened to her and have her refusal to give up, I thought that was very inspirational. And she's almost, she's rising from the ashes. So I thought that was a good contrast there of, yes, these things can happen, but you can still go on. You can still persevere.
I'm very happy it comes across that way. I think one of the things that was absolutely a mission of mine, like I didn't want anyone to read the book and be like, I want to be a metal tank or a metal machine like Nora, right? Because I feel like that would send the wrong message of like, oh, her disability is put into a way that this is better. And it's not as simple as that. Like there is a stage of like, this is objectively a worse state of being, but with acceptance, this can also be absolutely acceptable, absolutely fine. And I feel like walking that tightrope was very, very difficult because there's contrasting idea of like some media portraying disability as if it makes you superpowered and doesn't speak to the truth of it. On the other hand, others portray it as being like, oh, it's all doom and gloom, and the only thing you can really do is, just die. And, it sounds like hyperbole when I say that, but then you have Me Before You, which the whole plot of the disabled guy was, I want to kill myself so that you don't have to care for a disabled person, which obviously upset a lot of people. And yeah, I think that's a lot of like what I wanted to do there of like, I want people to realize like, I really admire how strong-willed Nora is, and like maybe they'll take away something from that, but I never want somebody to read that. It's like, I want to be disabled and I want to, be a metal tank like her. And I think that's something I will explore more in future books when people like, do books or stories or theater plays and try to portray her as being like suddenly better than she was before. Yeah.
And Aaron had a question. You have a female and male narrator for the audiobook. What made you decide to do that?
I could show off about the fact that it's a multicast book, which is partially true. It's not the. I think part of it is that I wanted a multicast, and at the very least two. But if I could have had more, that would have also been great because I felt like it's epic enough that it kind of calls for that of these different characters with these different voices. And when you have like really, you have one non-binary character who somewhat has like described as androgynous, but has somewhat more male features. And then suddenly you also have two characters which are distinctly only woman. So I'm like, you know what? Perfect. One male narrator, one female narrator, and I feel like they did an absolute. Like, if you guys end up listening to it, they did a phenomenal job with the narration. Truly, yeah. And it's something else entirely when you listen to the audiobook and you get to like the rape scene and you get to even the sex scenes themselves, and not just those, but they're just emotional scenes in the book when the characters are being vulnerable and speaking with like some serious inflection. That the narrators nail it. Yeah.
When the audiobook is in progress or when they're working on it, do you get updates when it's, or do you get the finished product?
I get the finished product. If I notice a very big issue, I can pass it on to the production team. But other than that, nothing. And which is fine. Here's something really interesting. I have found that it seems a lot of traditionally published authors get even less say about the book. They don't get to decide who gets cast for it. They don't get to make comments about how to do pronunciations. Podium's been great with me. They have said, hey, give me a pronunciation sheet of like how characters are being pronounced. Record yourself pronouncing those names and send them in. And at the same time, they're like, hey, who do you imagine being the narrator for the book? I told them what I was looking for. I sent them a clip of like, hey, here's Vetividia doing lore readings. I want this kind of vibe, and I want these individuals. And they're like, we're going to get in touch and see if they're up for it. So they've been really, really good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Really interesting to hear that. How long did it take you to write, Kian?
Draft one, honestly, I wrote almost nonstop for 5 to 6 months, 2,000 words a day. So
Wow.
draft one was like 5 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And then it took me close to 2 years to do following drafts. I think in the end it was give or take 5 drafts because I really wanted to nail it. I felt like I had something here that if I did right would get a lot of traction, and I was right about that. And to make sure that it was worth it, I wanted to absolutely ensure that everything was tip top. Yeah. I don't think I'm gonna wait that. Sorry.
2,000 words a day. That's impressive.
Yeah, I was very consistent. I will say that I think I'm not gonna wait as long for future books. I'm definitely gonna have the first draft of book 2 done mid of this year, but I hope that I'll be able to publish it already in 2024, perhaps later in 2024, but still. Yeah.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. That's a lot of writing.
Yeah.
Especially for a pantser, I think that would be, someone who just I know you had an outline, but you described yourself as a pantser, and writing that much for that long, that's intense.
It is. I think there's just some stories that you write that go off without a hitch, and the puzzle pieces fit together perfectly. I think this was one of those, and I think a lot of it, admittedly, is about trust in your own abilities. I think the moment you start to doubt yourself too much, you're going to start making unnecessary changes. And I've committed myself to the idea of like, you know what? Finish the book first, give it to a beta reader, and let them decide for you if it's good or not. Because I feel like you, as the author, don't have any right to decide if it's good or bad. And that's my own personal philosophy, and it's worked out for me.
Yeah, I'd say. Yeah. For the outline that you did, how much of your outline did you cover in the first book? How much of the outline is left for the remaining books, or do you have an outline for those yet?
I wouldn't even call it an outline. I just know what are the most important scenes that assuredly must happen. I know the big pivotal moments that will happen, and I think that's as much of an outline as I have, because I'm like, okay, it's not so much a marathon from point A to point B. It's more like, hey, I need to find a way to get to 8.1, right? And then from 8.1 to get to 8.2. And that's kind of what my process was like and is going to be like. And it's about hitting those major things. I know exactly how the books are going to end in terms of like the final book, and I'm already very excited. I feel like it's such a different approach to an ending in a fantasy book, and I don't think it will leave anyone happy, but I think it will leave everyone satisfied. At least that is my hope.
I'm not reading anymore, Kian. We're done. To be fair, if anybody reads book 1 of this and goes, "God, I was very happy with everything that happened in that book," I think there's questions to be asked.
Yeah, I think we've set the tone. That it's it's good.
And again, it's really interesting that every single person who's read it is saying like, I don't know if it's going to be for everyone, but I loved it. 5 stars. Yeah. And you weren't here for this, Chris. But before we started, I was telling Steve, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is actually messed up. This is really tough. So if you can't stomach it, don't." Like those are your words as well. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there are a lot of prudent people who will take that advice and acknowledge it. But everyone else who is like even partially curious, I think they'll take it as a challenge. They'll be like, you know what? I want to see what the hype's about. And that's great for me.
I've talked to a couple of people like, we'll see. I just don't think I'm not reading the foreword. I'd be surprised if it even affects me. We're like, okay, that's we'll talk. We'll talk about it afterwards. It's fine.
I mean, for you guys, is there like a almost sadistic side of you, which is feels like you're on my end of the fence now? Of like, oh, that's great. I can't wait for you to read it and see what your reaction is in that case.
Yeah, I think for people who are into these types of stories, I think they'll. I want to just kind of sit back and wait for the reaction. And we kind of got that a little bit when I was reading with Chris, because we were, kind of trying to not spoil anything, but we both knew what we were talking about. And Chris, did you get to that scene yet? And like, no. And then like 10 minutes later, oh yeah, I got to that scene.
Yeah, so for me, I don't really have expectations of dark fantasy because I don't feel like I've read enough of it, if I'm honest, But what I'm finding is actually know where my limits are. The things that annoy me, and actually the things that annoy me are are not dark scenes. They're narrative choices that annoy me way more in books and make me kind of go, oh, this is ridiculous, rather than something that's really nasty or something. And especially if it's in a place in the book or in a stage of the book where you feel like it's earned, or that it feels like it's some payoff for something, not just having nasty or dark scenes for no reason or for shock value, but to kind of say that there was an end to this, or we're going to use this in some way, and I'm sure people will have different appreciations of that, depending on how much it reacts with them. You know what I mean? It's depending on your reaction to an individual scene. Some people may go, it was earned, it was not earned. But I think you say that in your author notes at the back, like something to the effect of, I hope this hasn't left you in a totally comfortable feeling, when you come away from it, because that was not the intent,
Yeah. I think so. I'm not gonna, out of respect, I'm not gonna name any people. I think some scenes, like you just said, it impacts other people differently. And I noticed one person who said that the self-harm of Delilah had really, impacted them pretty hard. And I feel like that there are just some people who have a certain history with certain things. That's why it's so much closer to home when they read about it. And I am privileged enough and lucky enough that I have never been sexually assaulted or abused. So I'm writing about something based on like what I've researched, but I will never truly know how much of a problem that can be, Yeah.
But it must be interesting with I can barely remember a book that before it's been released has garnered this much praise so quickly. Kian, this is really, I think it was NC was the first person that I heard about it from when he came on the 50th episode and says, I'm reading this book at the moment, and honestly, this is really, really good. And from that, it sort of filtered through a couple of other people.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that. It's I'm optimistic, but I'm also having a healthy amount of just just not pessimism, but just I'm holding back any kind of expectation that might make me disappointed in the long run. But as things stand, I'm very happy with your response. And I feel like overall, every single person who's read it has had a reaction of like, that's exactly what I was aiming for, and the fact that I hit that. And there is a certain amount of uncertainty when you put out your baby and you don't know how it's going to be received. Even now, I'm like, okay, the reviewers love it, but what about the general masses? When they read it, how are they going to react? Yeah, and it's a very uncertain time period of like, I need to hit that kind of critical mass where enough people read it and enough people talk about it that it has enough of a reach. And it's never a guarantee. I do know that, I don't know if I can talk about this maybe in a future episode if it works out, but I do have certain, eggs in baskets where I've reached out to individuals to promote it who have a big following, and if it works out, then great. Patrick Leo is currently reading it. I think he's reading it, and if he likes it, he will promote it, but that's also not a guarantee. So at this point, it's just a lot of it is luck, and a lot of authors, they try to pretend like they know what they're doing, but at the end of the day, the part is luck.
Yeah, it definitely is luck and timing, and just the planets align sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I take away from it, because obviously I'd say to you, like I generally don't do reviews immediately. I just
Yeah.
hate the process of trying to put something down immediately when I like to sit with it for a few weeks. I think the thing that I keep coming back to it, even from it's only weeks since I finished it, is okay. There's really upsetting stuff in it. There's some very serious themes in here, but actually take all of that out, and you have a really well crafted fantasy story at the heart of it that I think everybody would relate to. So it's really about your predisposition to some of those themes, and if you are concerned, just read the foreword because it's very clearly detailed in there what you're coming up against, and that if you're okay with that, and I think you'll find a book that you really like, regardless of theme. Then if you're through that, so
I'm very
that's
happy
where I'm at about
with
it.
that. Yeah. I almost think though that go ahead and put those in because I think a lot of people's morbid curiosities are going to be like, I want to see if this lives up to that challenge. So they will go for it, and I feel like if anything, it'll probably get a lot of people interested, and that's my hope. Yeah.
It's almost Dark Soulsian in its approach to the gateway in. You'll be hollow if you don't get to the end of it. Then it's on you. It's not on me.
Yeah. I was thinking about the same thing. Absolutely. It's and I wouldn't fault anyone for being like I can't continue, but absolutely I think for some individuals that's going to be the Dark Souls aspect. It's difficult because it's hard to read some of the themes. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, it's a hell of. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next. There's a lot of just it didn't really strike me until the end, until the last little bit about evil. We don't know what it is, and it didn't really hit me until the end. Like we never found out what it is. So it's like it's something that we learned right off. I think pretty quickly, if not in the first few pages, but then at the end, it's like it didn't even occur to me. We don't know what that is until the end. So this like okay, we're in for a long series. There's a lot of story to be told still.
And I can't wait. I have so much planned, and I think a lot of you are there's going to be a lot more world building as well, and a lot of unraveling because there's, for example, the whole scene with a master taking Yvar's through the murals, and there's the murals at the end and at the beginning, and some of them are torn down and it hints at a hidden history, and that's something I'm also very excited to explore. Yeah.
Well, excited to read it. Like the Chris mentioned, it's I don't remember a book people being this excited and the positive response for a book. So it's not to add any pressure, but I think it's everything's been very positive. So I think it's encouraging.
And like you say, I haven't really, for all the darkness and all I haven't seen anybody come away from it going, I couldn't finish it.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you both. And I think that's, if anyone's out there who's like, what do I need to do to get into, becoming an author, social network, having people who become really good mates and talk about your book and, you just get to laugh together. And and I really, really appreciate that. So thank you.
No, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And also anyone who didn't happen to be here, I still appreciate you. So no harm there.
Yeah, time zones are a pain. So it seems like the time zone, it wasn't me this time. So I feel good about that. But no, thank you for the opportunity to read it early. I know that you have a ton of requests, so thank you for accepting ours.
Absolutely. I'm glad. Very glad. And I look forward to when this comes out and seeing what people's receptions are.
Yeah, definitely. So, Kian, where can people? Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
I would say look me up. KianNArdalan.com is my website, or you just look up 11th Cycle on Google. You'll find all the knickknacks there. You can find my social media stuff on my website, and from Twitter is where I'm most active. But I also, if you want to really know what's the newest, please sign up to my newsletter, and that will be the best way for me to stay in touch with you. And
No, go ahead.
And if there's anyone out there who just wants to send me a message for whatever reason, I love meeting new people, so don't hesitate.
I just want to read Aaron's comment. Thank you, everyone, for a great chat. Thanks again for the ARC. Looking forward to the immersive reread with the audiobook and the next installment.
I'm also very excited. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, guys.
And Chris, where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel now that I'm making videos again at my name. You can find me on Twitter at 7 o'clock shadow, or you can find me on the page Tune forums, where there's lots of great chat on there as well.
Nice. Well, thanks everyone for hanging out with us. We'll see everyone soon. And if hopefully you read the book and didn't just watch the spoiler discussion. But thanks again to everyone, and we'll see everyone soon.